Good evening, good afternoon, good morning from wherever you're joining us today. Welcome to the Africa Football Business Show, brought to you by the Football Foundation for Africa. Today, we are looking at legal issues in African football, specifically looking at an issue that is posing a huge threat to the football ecosystem, the sports ecosystem, not only in Africa, but globally, and that is match fixing. And we are looking how can we curb this vice. This particular episode is organized in collaboration with Sports Legal. So thank you very much for the collaboration. And we have two great guests joining us today, well experienced in this field. But just before we introduce them or they introduce themselves, I would like to take this opportunity to recognize our partners, sponsors, and that is Parma Sports, OTB Africa, C Beyond Leadership Forum, and iSportLand. Remember, through our collaboration with iSportLand, you can be able to access some of their courses at a discount using our FFA code, and that is FFA 10. Now, I'll take this opportunity to welcome our guests. We have John Hesser and Marcello Presilla, and I will give them the opportunity to just give us a bit of their background, starting with you, John.
Thank you very much for this invitation to this great show today, and I'm happy to be with you and Karen today to discuss the issues of match fixing in international sport. As you've already said, I'm a researcher at the University of Zurich, and I've done some research in the area, and I hope I can contribute to this great discussion today. Thank you.
Excellent, John. Over to you, Marcello.
Okay, good evening. Good evening to everyone, and thank you very much, Brian, Kieran, for this invitation. I'm delighted to be here to participate in this interesting discussion about such complex and important topic like match fixing. I'm a lawyer. I'm based in Rome. I'm working for Sportradar for years. For Sportradar is the global betting monitoring company, partner of FIFA, UEFA, and many other confederations to try to prevent and to detect match fixing around the globe. So I'm spending years and years studying this scourge, because this is a very terrible scourge, as I said Brian before, global problems, global issues, and today we are here to try to contribute to this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Marcello. Really, as you've mentioned, match fixing is not new in sports. It's not new in football, but it is increasingly posing an existential threat to the sports ecosystem. Maybe we can just start by understanding or defining what is match fixing. Marcello, please.
It's correct. Match fixing is not a new phenomenon. I'd say that is an old phenomenon. We have evidence of match fixing cases in the history, and match fixing happened many times in all 90s, in all regions in the United States, as well as in the major league in Europe. In the so-called literature scientific or juridical, one of the first cases of match fixing happened in baseball in the United States. Another serious case in football in England, in a famous matches with the Manchester United and Liverpool. So we are speaking about another era. But this phenomenon, I have to say, is probably totally different from the past. It has changed dramatically and drastically. Now we can speak about a phenomenon that is very influenced by the modern technology. Think, for example, about how it's easy to move money around the globe. You can you can push the button on your smartphone or your laptop, and you can move amount of money around the globe, from Africa to Europe, from Europe to Asia, and so on. The use of new technology, and I'm referring not only to the bank transfer, but also the possibility to contact people in the middle of the night. In each minutes of a day, you can stay in connection with the people around the globe. All this new technology, we can call like that, have facilitated a lot the spreading of match fixing. That in the past, in my opinion, was essentially a local phenomenon, handled at local level by local criminals that had the control of clubs or athletes. Now we can speak about a cross-border phenomenon involving different criminal groups. But essentially, one of the things that I have quite often noticed in the majority of the investigation that I knew, that is quite often the place where the match fixed happened is far from the place where the fixers are located. A match could be fixed in Africa, and the fixers can be located in Asia using the big betting Asian markets. So in this regard, and for this reason, I'm saying that this phenomenon is an old phenomenon, but very, very different from the past, from the phenomenon that we saw in the 70s, in 80s. Now we have to face a different challenge, And this requires, first of all, a good knowledge about how the phenomenon appear and how the fixers contact players, referees, athletes in general, and how to react. These are the general characteristics, but during the discussion, we can speak about other important features of match fixing.
Thank you very much, Marcello, for really setting the scene for us in terms of understanding what match fixing is, how it has evolved to the challenge we have currently, really a global challenge. You know, we always sing in praise of globalization, but as we can see, not all that comes with the globalization is positive. Now, over to you, John. I think why is it important that we address this issue of match fixing, especially when it comes to protecting the integrity of sports, the integrity of football in this case? Yes, and why is it urgent? Yeah.
Thank you very much. I think when we discuss match fixing, we have to see it from a broader perspective. So there are different purposes why we want to combat match fixing. The first one is if someone influences the outcome of an event or even parts of an event, which is called spot fixing, then this behavior takes away the unpredictable nature of a football or of other sporting events. And that's why we actually watch football matches or other sporting events, because we do not know the result at the time when we watch the game. So this is something we want to protect. Another issue is that match fixing is always related to the betting market. So the system, when we talk about match fixing, is that usually players are approached by third parties that are not bound by the rules and regulations of sports federations, and they offer money in exchange for their advantage on the betting market. So they place a high amount of money to a particular action that will happen on the field or during a football match, tennis match, and so forth. So when we talk about match fixing, we must always understand there is some relation to the betting market. And that's why we also need to ask whether we want to allow players to be active on the betting market as a wagerer, or if we want to prohibit it, that any player is involved in betting activities, because this could send or be an incentive that players ultimately get involved in match fixing and influence matches for their own benefit. So when we speak about match fixing and manipulation of sports competitions, we actually have to decide what we actually want to prohibit it in order to not only to protect the integrity of sport, but also to protect this public confidence in the authenticity and the integrity of sport. And here we must also think about the prohibition of the use of inside information, for example. And as I said, a lot of sports organizations prohibited betting on sporting events in the same sport, not only in the same league, but also worldwide. So no football player should be involved in any betting activity in order to keep this confidence of the public in the integrity of sport and in the sporting results.
Excellent, John. Maybe just before you continue, I'll ask you to reposition yourself so that we can you can see you clear. You can have your whole face. Thank you very much for that answer with regarding to why it's important that we address this issue of match fixing. We see there's the issue of integrity of sports. There's people who are benefiting financially but irregularly from match fixing, and also public confidence. And we know that also public confidence in sports is tightly linked to the commercialization and hence the sustainability of any football ecosystem, because sponsors are also looking at systems that are have integrity, really. And if we rob the sports ecosystem of that, then we are bound to lose. I know we have talked a lot about even just in starting, we have talked a lot about sports betting. A lot of people associate match fixing with sports betting, but there is more to this. It's not the only motivation why people fix matches. And maybe Marcello, you can come here and come in here again and tell us what are the other motivations behind match fixing.
Yeah, thanks for this question. It's important, really important to clarify that match fixing for betting purpose is one of the form of match fixing, or better, betting purpose are one of the motivation to fix a match. But we can classify match fixing for sports reason or purpose. This is one of probably the main reason why a match is fixed in football as well in many other sports. Usually we speak about match fixing referring to football, but we have to consider that probably the number one in the world, if we have a ranked, is tennis. For the numbers of match fixed year after year. But obviously football, for many different reasons, is one of the main targets of fixer. We say that a match could be fixed for sport reason when a club, for example, want to avoid demotion or relegation in a lower league, or when a club want to win a match for winning a title or for having the access to an international competition. There are many reasons. In the past, we purely spoke about sport reason. Now I have to say that also the club involved in a match fixing for sports reason get an economic benefit, because if we consider that winning a title, winning a league is not only the club doesn't get only the honor or the trophy, but also the money, the prize, the sponsorship linked to the participation at international competition, or as a consequence of the trophy. And it's possible to fix a match in many different ways, as well as when happened for betting purposes. A match could be fixed for betting purposes with a precise aim to get a financial benefit on the betting market. For example, fixing a football match for a draw, 0-0, or 2-2. Or 3-2 in case the fixers want to multiply in a very substantial way the investment on the betting market. And in this case, they need to do the agreement with both clubs when they bet on the perfect scoreline. They have the pre-knowledge that the match will end with a 3-2, 4-3. Other way, very common to fix the match for betting purposes are when fixers use the so-called total markets, under-over. They fix or try to fix the match using the number of goals. So this is very common, and there are many consequences also in the behavior of the footballers or the referee on the pitch, and these are many other very complex implications. This is possible using the local or national betting market, as well as the global betting market. And then, in my view, there is a so-called tertium genus, two categories of match fixing. That is when a match is fixed for a sports reason, and somebody that has the pre-knowledge of the final outcome will bet a specific amount of money to try to multiply to reach multiple goals with the same fixed match. So the original idea, the original purpose, the original aim is to fix the match for sports reason, but somebody, for example, a member of the staff, some players, or member of, for example, the ownership of the club, decide to invest money on the betting market. This is, for example, one of the case that I had to investigate some years ago in very, very relevant match fixing case.
Excellent. Maybe if I can just take you a bit back, Marcello, just to understand, who are some of the key players, or who are the actors usually when it comes to the fixing of matches?
It depends. It depends, Brian. Usually, it's very, very difficult that a player alone is able to fix a match. This happened. This happened. But it's not the rules. Sometimes it happened when the goalkeeper is involved. But usually, at least 2-3 footballers of the same team have to be involved. But obviously, I can confess you that there is no unique mode to fix a match. I study and I had investigated directly on different situations. But I can tell you that 2-3 footballers of the same team are needed to be involved in the same match fixing, and sometimes happened that they are not able to guarantee the exact result, the exact outcome desired by the fixers. Happened that match fixing is not a mathematical model. It's possible that the initial attempt to fix the match failed. But in any case, then we will discuss with Björn later. In any case, it's always a match manipulated. Also, when the final outcome is not the same desired by the fixers. Thank you.
Bringing you in, John, now we really understood match fixing is a severe problem that is impacting the football sports ecosystem. And it has been happening for a long time. Of course, at the onset, Marcello explained why the problem has become even more complex with the globalization and also with advancements in technology. But from a regulatory perspective, what are some of the challenges that we are faced with now, and what can be done in order to have an appropriate legal framework to not only deter, but also to kind of get the right sanctions, punish when match fixing happens? I can just draw to a few examples we've had here in Africa recently, or here in Kenya specifically. I think one of our Premier League clubs was relegated for being involved in match fixing. And then we had a group of referees that is even more recent. I think about 5 referees were banned by the Football Federation here. And it's interesting how we got to learn, or how the federation says they got to learn about the match fixing. It was actually a fixer who called in and said he had tried to fix, but the fix did not go through. And therefore, he was calling out the referees that he has been working with. What are some of the challenges you see from a legal perspective in dealing with this problem, John?
Yes, when we speak about legal challenges, then we always need to distinguish the disciplinary measures that international sports organizations or national sports organizations can undertake to prevent and detect match fixing in their sports, so they can implement rules and regulations on match fixing. But we always need to remember there are different actors when it comes to match fixing. So we have players, coaches, referees, all persons that are bound by the rules and regulations of these associations. and we have third parties. And sports organizations only have a disciplinary power to sanction the actors that are bound by the rules and regulations, meaning players, coaches, referees, and all the other direct and indirect members. And in order to tackle those issues, that we also have organized crime groups that are involved in this operation, we also need a legislative approach from national governments or an international community. And this requires first that we need a collaboration between sports organizations and governments or law enforcement agencies. And we see this, that information is widely changed between sports organizations, betting companies, Sportradar is probably also involved in this operation, and national governments. And you can also see this approach, as we will see later, in the Macola Convention, which is the first international convention to tackle match fixing in an international or regional aspect. And in order to have some power on the legislative side, we also need to have some sort of criminal provisions on match fixing. So we can see in some countries we have specific provisions on match fixing that is embedded in national criminal codes, for example, in Switzerland or Germany or Australia, for example. And other countries deal with this matter under fraud. And then we always need to decide whether this falls within the scope of fraud or not. So here we can see different approaches, and one approach that was undertaken by sports organizations to prevent match fixing are reporting and cooperation obligations. So especially reporting obligations work as follows. If a player is approached by a third party or another player, then this player has the obligation to report any approach to the sports governing body. And by doing that, the sports governing body knows that something is going on in this specific match or during this specific event. And therefore, they can take some measures to prevent match fixing happening in a specific sports event.
Interesting. You've just brought in something there that perhaps many of us are not aware of or do not know how it works. And this is the Macola Convention, Macolin for me coming from Kenya. It's actually what they say, the Council of Europe Convention on the Manipulation of Sports Competition. Could you please share like more light on what this is and how it can have an impact outside of even the Council of Europe members in Africa, for example?
Yes, sure. So Macola is the place in Switzerland where this convention was agreed upon. And this convention has the objectives of prevention, detection, and sanctioning of match fixing in an international or regional aspect. And it's not open for Council of Europe members to sign and ratify this convention, but all countries in the world can basically sign and ratify this convention. And it's an international convention, and we need this international approach because you may know that in doping matters, we have the WADA code, which is a uniform framework to fight doping in sport worldwide. And in match fixing, we do not have a uniform approach. And the Macola Convention tries to give some guidance on uniform approaches. For example, they provide a specific definition of match fixing, which says that match fixing is the influence of a game that takes away the unpredictable nature of a game for undue advantages. So all points that we've already mentioned. But they also give a definition for inside information or what illegal betting is. And they also provide for national platforms. And national platforms work as an information hub. So law enforcement agencies, betting companies, sports organizations, and all organizations involved in the detection or prevention of match fixing should send their information to this national platform, and all other parties involved can use this information in order to commence investigations into their own operation and yes, to fight match fixing together on a national level.
Thank you. We have just a question which is directly related to what we are talking about right now. To what extent does the Macola Convention help fight match fixing in the EU? And would you advise Africa to follow the same approach? I think how many? About 32 countries have signed, and only 7 have ratified the same, and 2 have, what do you say, have actioned the same. That is Switzerland.
Platform.
Yeah. To what extent has this convention been successful in fighting match fixing?
Yeah, so the Council of Europe is a bit broader than the EU. So the EU has only 27 countries, I think, and the Council of Europe is much broader, which also includes Russia, for example. And in the beginning of the Macola Convention, I think all the governments were quite excited that now there is this international convention on match fixing, but the signing and ratifying process has been very slow. So the Macola Convention only entered into force in 2019. And as the Macola Convention was open for signature in 2014, I believe. So it took more or less 5 years for the convention to enter into force. However, I believe that this can be guidance for all countries in the world. So if they do not know what match fixing means, and if they look for a uniform definition on match fixing, then they can look into this framework and see whether this is something they agree upon. For example, the Macola Convention also recommends that match fixing should be criminalized in a country. And this is something what I already mentioned is necessary to have a uniform approach between law enforcement agencies, sports organizations, and all the other stakeholders in this process. So to answer this question, I do believe that the Macola Convention is a good framework, it's a good start, and governments may not have to ratify it, but they should use it as a guidance to join this force against match fixing in international sport.
Excellent. I think in Africa, it's only Morocco is one of the countries that has signed the Macola Convention. Going into country-specific efforts against match fixing, and just to bring you back in, Marcello, you've done a lot of work in Italy, a country that has been notorious for match fixing, especially in football. Could you please share more about the situation in Italy? What was the problem, and what are some of the measures that the country has taken in order to combat this scourge of match fixing, Marcello?
Yeah, it's true, absolutely true. Italy was plagued by match fixing for years and years. We have experimented this phenomenon in 70s, 80s, and more or less in each decade. And in 1989, the parliament approved probably the first specific law and regulations against match fixing. It was in 1989 when, as an answer to this scourge, Parliament approved Law 401, Article 1, introducing the specific crime of match fixing. As I was saying Björn before, in the lack of specific regulation is quite often problems when you want to prosecute this illicit behavior. So, as he was saying before, in some countries the approach is based on the crime of corruption, in other fraud, but it's always difficult. Having a specific rules condemning and sanctioning the behavior of match manipulation, I think, is something really, really important. But coming more in deep, I want to explaining a little bit how these rules are structured, and then Brian, I can tell something about my personal experience on the pitch, running educational programs and participating directly to all the most important investigation in Italy. Just to conclude what I was saying about the rules, this crime is a crime, so-called formal crime. So the criminal conduct occurs when someone offers money or other benefits, goods or advantage to another party in a match, before the match, or also on the pitch, with a clear aim to manipulate the match. In this case, we have already the conduct of match fixing, and the conduct is already punishable. If the other party, so it could be the players, it could be the referee, accept these offers, it will be involved. It will be involved. What is not important in this wrongdoing is the final outcome. So the final outcome is not an essential element of this crime. Obviously, could be, as I said, an aggravation of, in case of the punishment, but is not a necessary element. So what is important is that the act to convince the players to manipulate a match is a concrete act. The offer of money is concrete. In all cases of match manipulation, in case the purpose is sport purpose, or the case is betting purpose, we have an imprisonment minimum 2 years up 9 years. A fine up 100,000 euros. Then this law that, as I said before, was introduced in the Italian juridical system in 1989 was modified various times in 2014 and last time in 2019. Last sanctions introduced are also the confiscation of all goods, money, and luxury cars, flats that referee involved in match fixing, players or common criminals have gained thanks to the match fixing. All this money, all these goods can be confiscated by the state. This is a precise answer, and these rules were introduced recently because match fixing is considered like an economic crime. We were speaking before about the nature, but if we are speaking about match fixing for betting purposes, or we are speaking for match fixing for sports reason, the economical motivation are always on the table. So this is a typical economic crime, and is extremely important. My judgment about these rules was immediately positive because it's not enough having criminal sanction like the imprisonment, but it's also necessary to interrupt the flow of money coming from the match manipulated to the author or the authors of the manipulations. These are the criminal sanction. Coming to the sports sanction, as you know, each federation has a proper code of conduct but referring to the FIGC code, the Code of Justice of the Italian Football Federation, we can refer to Article 30, and in Article 30 is established that all the referee or the players involved in a match manipulation will be banned for at minimum 4 years, and they will sanction with 50,000 euros. Then there is another important aspect. Each registered member of the federation, so I'm referring to players, referees, sport director, members of technical staff, they are obliged to report to the federal prosecutor each attempt when they are involved in an attempt to fix the match, even if the match was not fixed. They have immediately refer all the circumstances of this approach to the sports prosecutor. In case they failed to report this approach, they will be sanctioned with a ban of 1 year from the pitch. Coming to the other aspects, the other question, what we are doing in Italy. I have taken the responsibility of this duty since the end of 2012, and since that time we are running year after year educational campaign with all football leagues, with volleyball, with tennis, with the most important sports stakeholders. I firmly believe that education, information of athletes, manager, referee, lawyers, journalists is extremely important to spread awareness about the risk of this cancer in our modern society. Education and information of athletes is extremely important. Obviously, it's not enough to delete completely match fixing from the sports. It's not realistic. We can work 24 hours a day, but this is a human behavior, and like drug trafficking, and is not realistic. Imagine that match fixing will be completely reduced to zero. But we can combine to education and information the use of knowledge and advanced modern technological system, like, for example, the so-called Universal Fraud Detection System of Sportradar, controlling, monitoring the competition, and the combination of these factors, plus many other things that we can explain later, can help to mitigate the risk, to take under control the situation. But obviously, we can never sleep with thinking that the problems is 100% solved, because this is not realistic from my view.
Thank you. You just brought in the FDS, the fraud detection system that you offer as a service at Sportradar. And I was coming to that question. What has been the uptake of this service, to be specific to football? I know Sportradar is a global company. What has been the uptake by football organizations, being federations and leagues, of this system? How widespread is the use of this fraud detection system, and can you say it's been successful in terms of mitigating the threat of match fixing?
For sure, absolutely. We are speaking about an advanced form of crime, and in our era, we cannot imagine to answer to modern crime with old methods. we need to prepare a very structured answer involving, as I said before, many aspects, legal framework, both in sports and in criminal law side, education, information, and I can confess you guys that the athletes, the footballers, are happy to receive this kind of information. They are not bored. They understood, participating to the section, that information, education about integrity protection is something essential for them. And coming to the use of the so-called fraud detection system, we have to say that this modern and advanced technological system is offered to the confederation leagues, providing them directly completely overview about what's happened on the betting market. And using this technology, and especially the expertise of the analyst, many important and recent match-fixing cases for betting purposes, because we are speaking specifically about match-fixing for betting purposes, were detected in recent times in Champions League, for example. And UEFA took very, very severe punishment against the clubs involved. The answer were very, very severe. FIFA, UEFA are applying the so-called zero tolerance. And another important case, because you were asking me provide to the audience some concrete example, refer to a famous match played in Africa. This is not a secret. It was a public event, public match. I'm speaking about the famous South Africa-Senegal played in November 2016. A very important match because it was the match to win the access to Russia 2018, the final, the World Cup. The match, as you probably everybody knows, was fixed at that time by the referee for betting purposes, and fraud detection system that was working on this match to control, to monitor, immediately recorded suspicious betting movements on the Asian market, something very, very extraordinary, very, very suspicious, and refer to FIFA, informing precisely in a report, very structured report, what the system recorded and detected. And based on this report, FIFA conducted the own investigation and then took two important decisions. One, banned for life the author of this match-fixing case, this illicit behavior, the referee, and this is a clear message to everybody. But the second, most significant, important, for the first time in the history of football, a match was repeated. FIFA decided that cannot be tolerate a match draw, a match fix. So South Africa, Senegal was replayed the year later in November 2017, and that time Senegal won a regular match, normal match, and won the access to the final World Cup. So obviously the team was not involved absolutely in this case, no responsibility. But the decision of FIFA, for me, is something very, very important, because make the history for the first time. Everybody has to know that a match fixed can be repeated and should be repeated. And for the future, this should be the rules. Obviously, it's not simple to repeat each match fixed if we imagine that each year there are a lot of match fixed in football, in tennis, cricket, basketball, and other sports, volleyball. But this is something important for the juridical consequences, for the social aspects, and so on and so on.
We just have we take a question from one of our viewers, and then we'll move to you, John. It says that Marcello mentioned earlier the fixtures are not banned by the football regulations. So what can SGBs do in order to ensure that fixtures are kept away from influencing matches?
But if I understood correctly the question, we have distinguished the position of the fixers if the fixers are normal criminal outside the sports regulation. Probably also Björn was speaking about this aspect before. We have to distinguish the sport sanction, the disciplinary sanction that can be issued by a sport body, FIFA, CAF, Italian Federation, Switzerland Federation, and so on. Obviously, disciplinary sanction can be addressed towards players, referees, sport director, technical staff. Normal criminals, member of gang or individual criminal, can be punished only by the criminal law, under the criminal law, by the state law. But this question is really interesting because open many other window in this discussion, and is linked with my first statement. That is, crime is a new form of crime, very difficult to investigate, very difficult to prosecute. Especially thinking if a match is played in Africa and fixers are based in Europe or vice versa. And this is a serious problem. How you can prosecute a person that is far from your jurisdictions. This poses a lot of juridical questions. It's not easy to solve. First of all, a common legal framework would be desirable because it would be very helpful in this regard.
All right, thank you, Marcello. Over to you, John, and again, just to take or to borrow from one of the questions from our viewers, that is Timothy Kaja. He says, in light of the principle of sports autonomy, how well do states and sports governing bodies relate when it comes to this fight for match fixing? I think this is addressing the wider governance issues in sports and how they impact the fight against these vices in football in this case. And you also had a question for Marcello, John. Go ahead.
Yes, maybe I ask my question to Marcello first before I answer this question. I had a question regarding the fraud detection system. Do you qualify this as a tool to prevent match fixing, or is it a way to gather indirect evidence? Because as I see it, sports proceedings need to be distinguished between preventive and repressive investigations, and you also have repressive and preventive tools. And in the moment, the fraud detection system has or shows an alert, then the fix is already happening, right? So
yep.
I would qualify it as a purely detection system, as the name provides for. But would you also think that this is able to prevent match fixing in a broader picture?
No, I'd say that the use of fraud detection system as is also important in terms of prevention. For example, in all my educational section with all players in Italy, in all these years, I have met famous superstar of football and players of youth league. I always communicated them that all their the match that they were playing, were under the control of the Sportradar. This is, for me, is extremely important in terms of prevention. But in general terms, I'd say that I would never stop a match because there is an alert. I clarify my position in all situations. I think that a match, even if there are strong evidence that could be fixed, has to be played. We cannot stop. Nobody has to stop a match before the match is played, for many important reasons. Also, because otherwise we could generate the chaos. An alert, and then we block a match, we stop a match. It will be a mess, a chaos. Yes. And then will be really problematic in a cars, in a sport cars, as in a criminal cars, decide if that match was effectively fixed or not. You can imagine the lawyer of the players, the referee said, no, it's just an alert, it's just a mathematical model. No, it's not true, the match, the chaos. So my opinion is that the match need to be played, must to be played, and then there is another side for the investigators. So obviously, I don't know if I answered your question, Björn, completely, or there is some other aspects. My approach is always to create awareness inside and outside football. Everybody has to know. Sometimes I use the parallel, like when there is a radar control on the street, on a highway. No? What is the purpose of the radar on the street? To prevent an accident between 2-3 cars, or to sanction the drivers. No, I think we should prevent the incidents, the accidents. So I want to communicate that the match are under control, because everybody has to know and stay very pose attention to this aspect. There are people working on the pitch, and there are people working outside to guarantee the integrity of the match. Coming to the other question of the friend Timothy, sports bodies usually are independent by the criminal authority. So usually, for example, I can speak for the experience in Italy. Sport prosecutor can run independently by the state prosecutor, by the police, the investigations. The problem is, speaking very in a very honest way, that sport bodies, sport prosecutors don't have real concrete way for investigation. So it's quite common that they base the investigation, for example, on a Sportradar reports, but then they need the investigations and the elements of the investigation coming from police. Police is allowed to use wiretapping. Sport bodies cannot use wiretapping, cannot intercept conversation by criminals or by members of associations.
But they can download all the mobile phone information. They can have access to Facebook messages or electronic devices. So there are some investigatory measures that sports organizations can also have, and sometimes they have more power than law enforcement agencies. So yes, they do have some investigatory
rights. This is right. This is right. Exactly. This is right. And this is something that the sports bodies can do directly, and they do. I can tell you openly that we support, for example, sport bodies in this specific area. But obviously, a very complex investigation needs the cooperation between state authority, criminal prosecutor, criminal police, and sports investigators. But answering to Timothy, they are independent from the state authority.
Yes, and if I just add, this leads to what I've mentioned before. Sports organizations have a regulatory authority or autonomy, and they can therefore decide what should be sanctioned under their regulatory framework. So if they want to have a sanction on the use of inside information, then they have to provide a clear and concise provision on the prohibition of the use of inside information. But they can also decide, okay, we don't want to sanction the use of inside information because we don't see it as a big threat for our sport. So they can really decide what acts and omissions should be sanctioned. And Marcello mentioned this before, those reporting and cooperation obligations are common in sports now. So most of the international sports organizations have decided to put such provisions into their codes of conduct. And but that's for each individual sports organization to decide what acts or omissions they want to sanction under their regulatory frameworks.
Thank you very much. That's quite clear now, and definitely there's a lot more there to chew on. We'll stay with you, John, and there's a very important question coming from one of our users, and I think this is very crucial, especially for Africa. This is a question from Munabi Philip. Sports betting seems to be one of the motivations of match fixing, yet sports betting houses seem to play a big role in club sponsorship. Doesn't this downplay efforts to fight the vice? We know, I think more than half the English Premier League teams are sponsored by betting companies. But looking now even at the situation here in Kenya, there has been a proliferation of sports betting companies that are financing football in one way or the other. I think at this point it looks like the only finance providers for football in Kenya are sports betting companies. What's your take on these, John? And as we come to a close, we are the hour mark, so we'll be closing soon.
Yes, there will be a quick answer. So it's actually oxymoronic if you look at this development in international sports. So you have sports organizations that do not want to have athletes to be engaged in betting, but on the other hand, they have like financial gain from those sponsorship agreements. And I think Stoke FC even is owned by a betting company in the UK. So yes, so in my opinion, there should be, or every stakeholder should play by the same rules. So if you have associations having, or actually, I think in Spain, there's a regulation which says sports organizations cannot be sponsored by betting companies. And I think this would be a legit approach so that no one is gaining any advantages from the betting market.
Excellent. Thank you very much, John. And thank you very much to our guests today, Marcello, Presilla, and John Hesser. We'll just take this opportunity to perhaps get your closing remarks, and if you can highlight perhaps some of the things that you're doing for the future in terms of how we can protect the integrity of sports, the integrity of football. We'll start with you, Marcello, and then John will wrap up for us.
Yeah, I think it's very, very important to enforce educational programs in each country, to invest time, energy to spread awareness amongst the athletes, amongst the manager, because the underestimation of match fixing is a serious problem. Sometimes when in many cases I notice especially at the beginning of my experience in this field, that many ex-footballers, many director was telling about match fixing is something that always happened in football. It's not a crime. So this approach with the aims to underestimate a violation like match fixing for me is a serious problem. So a big educational campaign is something that I always suggest in each country, in each region. Then reinforce all methods to prevent and detect match fixing. Technology now is a good support, as I was telling before, because we are speaking about advanced technological crime. Then each state needs to take seriously this issue at legal level, modifying and updating the internal rules, the state rules as well, the sports rules, and then reinforcing the cooperation. In each conference, in each symposium, everybody speaks about cooperation, but I have to say that criminals cooperate much better between them than the investigators. So this is the reality, unfortunately. Fixers are more in cooperation between them than the investigators. This happens in Italy, in Europe, in the world. This is general rules. Sometimes people don't want to share information, and without sharing information, it's very, very difficult to have a serious activity, a serious activity of prevention and detection against match fixing. I want to say last thing about the role of bookmakers. In my opinion, bookmakers are important, have an important position in fighting match fixing. They have the information. The bookmaker in general are company, private company, in some case public companies. They sell products. They don't have interest that the match are fixed. Because when a match is fixed, especially for betting purpose, the bookmaker is victim. For a very simple and clear reason. If I fix a match for betting purpose, I bet. And when I withdrew the win, I'll get back the money invest, multiply the level of the odds. So the price will be paid directly by the company. The company is the bookmaker. So in my experience, I always had a cooperation of bookmakers. Then obviously we can discuss that some bookmakers in some jurisdiction, for example in Europe, is more proactive in cooperating. Other bookmakers, for commercial reason, are less proactive. But this is another aspect. I don't want to speak too much about this aspect. But for me, it's important to have a clear idea about the topic of match fixing, that we don't mix the position of bookmakers like entity that creating the conditions for match fixing. This is something that we have to distinguish in a very, very clear way, because otherwise we don't have a clear picks and consequently a clear strategy to tackle match fixing. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Marcello. Over to you, John, for your concluding remarks.
Yes, thank you very much. So for me, we must distinguish what measures must be taken by, or what is useful for sports organizations and law enforcement agencies. They must understand how matches are manipulated, and as Marcello said, match fixers are getting more and more sophisticated, so they must keep researching how matches are manipulated. And for athletes, it's vital to have education. Why is this so important? Because usually we have young players that are approached by match fixers because they need financial gain to make it to the top of their sport. So in this area, education is key, as Marcello already pointed out. And when it comes to the sharing of information, we must ensure that the procedure is always fair. So if an athlete has to provide information based on his or her cooperation obligations, then we must somehow ensure that self-incriminating information is not provided to law enforcement agencies, but sports organizations can always assist criminal investigations in a fair manner. So this is something important to remember, and we need to have further discussions on this topic for sure. And I hope we have more discussions in the future.
So thank you very much. John, Hesser, and Marcello, Presilla. We really appreciate you taking your time to share your knowledge, expertise, experience with us here on the Africa Football Business Show. It's been more than an hour. Sometimes the time really flies by, and as John concluded, there is still a lot more we could discuss. But even more important is for us to take action when it comes to the protection of the integrity of sport, integrity of football, so that we can continue to strengthen the ecosystem of sports, continue to make it more sustainable and commercially viable. So thank you very much as well to our viewers who joined us today. Great questions from the audience, and we appreciate really your participation. So as we draw to a close, again, it's just to also appreciate our partners, that is OTB Africa, Parma Sports, CBeyond Leadership Forum, as well as iSport LAN. And this particular session was organized in collaboration with Sports Legal. So thank you very much, Kairan Noor, and your team there. With that, we'd like to bid you goodbye. See you again in a couple of weeks when we have our the next episode of the Africa Football Business Show. Once again, thank you very much to our special guests, John Hesser and Marcello Presilla, and we hope we'll have another opportunity to host you. For now, goodbye, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.